Today we're going to be talking about postmodern fantasy. And to start with, what I would say is that a few days ago I was asked, what constitutes a postmodern novel? And as good of a question as that is, there isn't really a good answer to it. Postmodernism, like a lot of literary movements, is not unified. When we talk about something being postmodern, we talk about it being a form of postmodernism, and that there are many, many different types of postmodernisms. What they all share, to one degree or another, is a tendency to question some of the basic fundamental ideas that we have, some of our commonsensical notions. And all three of these novels sort of question things to a varying degrees. Perhaps most startlingly in the fact that none of them have what you would call a firm ending. All of their endings are ambiguous and ambivalent, and they don't really answer anything in the novel. Some of you have already pointed out that these novels incorporate elements from other genres, and just as we saw in cross-genre work, we see elements of mystery, science fiction, horror, suspense, even to a certain degree nonfiction incorporated into these works. And even the fantasy elements that they have are kind of screwed up. I mean, you can read all three of them to varying degrees as quest stories, the idea of the quest narrative, with someone searching for something, albeit the landscapes that people are moving through, such as in House of Leaves, the deep, dark, mysterious place that's being explored is in fact the interior of a house. Or the heroes, Ike from The Descent and Freedom from Vellum, are very, very different than what you would expect in another genre. So even in the sense that these novels are fantasy, they're not fantasy like Lord of the Rings or like Robert E. Howard or even like Alice in Wonderland. They're a new fantasy which has sort of been permeated through the mass culture, taking ideas along the way and incorporating them into the stories. And just like real life, at the end, it's not everything's resolved. A lot of things are left hanging. For those of you who are watching this lecture and hoping that I'm going to, tell you what your novel, the novel you read, really meant, you're going to be kind of disappointed. While I can point out a couple of things that are important in the novels, for the most part, these novels are much more, as one would expect in a postmodern novel, about asking questions than they are about answering them. So, just real briefly, let me discuss each of the books in turn. The Descent by Jeff Long, as the lecture has already indicated, draws heavily on our ideas of the underworld, both through sort of religious texts, such as Dante's Inferno, but also through more secular texts, such as Journey to the Center of the Earth. The idea that beneath the surface there is a rich ecology that we have, as of yet, not discovered. And the novel is about that process of discovery and exploration. There are a lot of things going on in the novel, and it draws fairly heavily on Long's own experience as a mountain climber and with his experience in the Far East. You'll notice that there's a lot of reference to Eastern mysticism and Eastern practices that permeate the novel. One of the more interesting things about the structure of the narrative is the fact that you have several sort of overlapping storylines, not overlapping in the sense of some of the other novels, but overlapping in the sense that sometimes the characters come together, but that the storylines primarily proceed by themselves. And you also have this periodically interrupted with these little disturbing snippets of what the Hadal are doing in a particular area. I lent this book to someone once and was really surprised because this was not someone who I really expected would really like the book. I was sort of describing it to them, and they said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." I said, "Well, I think parts of it might bother you." And one of the things that she reported is that she kind of got into the habit of sort of skipping through the main story just to read those little snippets of what the Hadal were doing. Her particular favorite, and I've got to admit I've always found this particular sequence pretty interesting myself, was the sequence of the butterfly collector who falls into the tunnels, and the long sequence of as his flashlight burns out and the Hadal come closer and closer. The other thing that is kind of interesting about The Descent is the way that it sort of incorporates contemporary politics into the narrative framework. If you look at the sequel to The Descent, which is called Deeper, you see that some of the ideas are explored much further in that novel than they were in The Descent. But that trend of world politics and what's going on in the real world sort of informing what's going on in the novel is kind of interesting. A large section of Deeper is devoted to the tension that arises between the Chinese and U.S. governments as they attempt to sort of introduce order into the underworld.